Story 1. The Silent Room. Sarah had always loved the idea of living alone in a quaint apartment in the city. The old building she chose had character, high ceilings, antique fixtures, and creaky wooden floors that seemed to tell stories of their own. Yet there was an air of unease about it. The neighbors were unfriendly, always avoiding her gaze, and seemed unusually quiet. But Sarah chalked it up to city life and looked forward to making her new space feel like home. The first night was uneventful. She unpacked her belongings, hung up some fairy lights, and settled into her bed with a book. It wasn't until the second night that she noticed something odd. Faint whispers seemed to seep through the wall, so soft that she thought it might be her imagination. She pressed her ear to the wall, trying to make out the words, but all she could hear was a murmur, like a distant conversation. By the third night, the whispers became louder. They always seemed to emanate from the direction of room 303, which was directly across from hers. The landlord had mentioned it during her tour. "Don't go near that room," he'd said firmly. When she asked why, he mumbled something about legal reasons and changed the subject. Sarah assumed it was abandoned or undergoing repairs, but the noises suggested otherwise. Unable to sleep, Sarah began to investigate. She knocked on the door of 303 one night, but there was no answer. The whispers stopped abruptly. Her curiosity deepened when she noticed faint scratch marks on the door, as though someone had tried to claw their way out. Determined to uncover the mystery, she spent the next day looking for clues online. She found nothing about the apartment, but local forums hinted at strange happenings in the building. Residents disappearing without a trace, reports of ghostly apparitions, and an eerie feeling that permeated the halls. The next evening, armed with a flashlight and a bobby pin, Sarah decided to open the door. She reasoned that it was probably just an old storage room. After a few tense moments of fumbling with the lock, it clicked open. The door creaked as it swung inward, revealing a small, dimly lit room. It was bare, except for an old rocking chair facing the corner. The walls were smeared with what looked like faded handprints, some too high to have been made by a human. The air grew heavy as Sarah stepped inside. Her flashlight flickered, casting shifting shadows on the walls. Then she heard it, a faint humming, like a child's lullaby. It seemed to come from the rocking chair, which began to sway gently, as if moved by an invisible hand. Sarah froze, her breath hitching. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The door slammed shut behind her. She spun around, dropping the flashlight, which rolled across the floor and illuminated a set of footprints, leading from the corner to where she stood. The chair rocked faster now, the lullaby growing louder and more discordant. Desperately, she clawed at the door, but it wouldn't budge. The humming turned into laughter, cold, cruel laughter that echoed around the room. When her neighbors found the door ajar the next morning, Sarah was gone. All that remained was her flashlight, flickering weakly on the floor. The whispers in room 303 ceased after that, but the rocking chair was never moved. Some say if you press your ear to the door late at night, you can still hear the faint strains of a lullaby. Story 2. The Forgotten Tunnel. Mike, Emily, and Jake were avid urban explorers who thrived on the thrill of venturing into the unknown. They'd explored everything from abandoned factories to crumbling mansions, documenting their findings on social media. One rainy afternoon, while hiking in the woods, they stumbled upon a discovery that would change their lives forever. A train tunnel hidden beneath a canopy of overgrown vines. The entrance was partially collapsed, leaving just enough space for them to crawl through. Mike, the most adventurous of the group, insisted they go inside. "Think of the views we'll get," he said, flashing his camera. Emily hesitated, sensing something was off. The air around the tunnel felt colder than it should, and a faint metallic scent lingered in the breeze. Inside, the tunnel was long and dark, stretching into oblivion. Their flashlights illuminated the walls, which were covered in strange symbols and cryptic phrases. The graffiti didn't look recent, and Emily couldn't shake the feeling that the markings were more than just art. She snapped a photo to research later. As they ventured deeper, the air grew damp, and the metallic smell intensified. Jake joked about finding treasure, but Emily wasn't amused. About half a mile in, they stumbled upon an old mining cart filled with rotting clothes and rusted tools. It looked as though it hadn't been touched in decades. "Creepy," Jake muttered, poking at the clothes with a stick. That's when they heard it, the sound of footsteps echoing behind them. They spun around, but the entrance was too far away to see, and their flashlights revealed nothing but empty tunnel. "Hello?" Mike called out, his voice bouncing off the walls. There was no response. Emily's heart raced. She wanted to leave, but Mike pressed forward, convinced it was just another explorer. The footsteps grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Suddenly, Emily's flashlight flickered and died. Jake's followed, leaving only Mike's dim beam to light their way. Panic set in as a shadow moved at the edge of the light. It was tall and hunched, its limbs unnaturally long. The figure stepped closer, and they saw its face, or what was left of it. Its hollow eyes and skeletal grin were burned into Emily's mind as she screamed. They ran, but the tunnel seemed endless. The entrance they had come through was gone, replaced by solid rock. The creature's footsteps echoed behind them, slow and deliberate, as if savoring their fear. One by one, their screams faded into silence. Weeks later, hikers discovered an abandoned camera near the tunnel's entrance. The final video showed Mike, Emily, and Jake running, their faces twisted in terror. The last frame captured a shadowy figure standing just behind them, reaching out with clawed hands. Story 3. The Watchful Doll. Emma had been fascinated with antiques since childhood. She loved the idea of owning items with stories, remnants of lives long gone. One rainy afternoon, while exploring a flea market on the outskirts of town, she stumbled upon a peculiar doll. It was unlike any she'd seen before. A porcelain figure with unnervingly lifelike blue eyes, painted red lips, and golden curls. Something about it was both captivating and unsettling. The vendor, an elderly woman with a crooked smile, hesitated when Emma reached for the doll. "This one's different," she warned. "People say it's cursed. Bad things happen to those who keep it." Emma laughed, thinking the woman was trying to inflate its value with a spooky tale. She handed over the cash and left with her new prize. That evening, Emma placed the doll on her bookshelf. Its glassy eyes seemed to follow her as she moved around the room, but she dismissed it as her imagination. At around 3 a.m., a faint giggling sound woke her up. She sat upright, her heart racing, but the room was silent. She blamed it on a dream and went back to sleep. The next morning, she found the doll sitting on her nightstand, though she was certain she'd left it on the shelf. Its head was tilted slightly as if watching her. Uneasy, Emma decided to get rid of it. She drove to a dumpster several miles away and tossed it inside. Yet, when she returned home, the doll was back on the shelf, its painted lips curving into a faint smile. Over the next few days, Emma began to experience strange occurrences. Doors creaked open on their own, shadows darted across her peripheral vision, and the giggling grew louder each night. The doll moved constantly, always closer to her. One morning, she woke to find it sitting on her pillow, its tiny porcelain hand resting on her cheek. Desperate, she consulted a local antique expert who paled at the sight of the doll. "This isn't just an artifact," he said. "It's a vessel. Whatever's attached to it isn't human." He advised her to destroy it, but warned that doing so might anger whatever resided within. That night, Emma built a fire in her backyard. She hesitated as she held the doll over the flames, its eyes seeming to plead with her. Summoning her courage, she dropped it into the fire. The flames roared unnaturally high, and the giggling turned into an ear-piercing scream. Then, silence. Emma thought it was over, but strange things continued to happen. Her reflection in the mirror didn't always match her movements, and her shadow often lingered a moment too long. One morning, as she brushed her hair, she noticed something horrifying. Her lips were painted a bright, unnatural red, just like the doll's. And when she looked closer, her reflection winked at her.